There's a particular flavor of rage you feel when you wake up to find your own ranch gate padlocked shut with a chain that isn't yours, and a smug handwritten note zip-tied to the fence reading, "Private access only. HOA jurisdiction." I stood there in my pajamas and boots, coffee thermos in hand, blinking at the audacity like it was a hallucination brought on by bad dreams or spoiled milk. But the padlock was real. The note was real. And the entitled witch who put it there? Very real. Karen Millstone, the self-appointed enforcer of an HOA I never agreed to join and technically didn't belong to, had decided my ranch's gravel driveway, which cut across a sliver of her undeveloped lot, was suddenly her property. The same strip of land she'd ignored for 3 years. The same one the county deed had gifted to me in a legal easement after a survey dispute. She must have gotten bored or run out of people to bully about mailbox height, because now she'd chosen a new battlefield, my gate. At first, I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone else had done it. But then I saw her smug little Honda CR-V parked on the shoulder with a folding lawn chair set up beside it like she was tailgating a victory. She had binoculars, a clipboard, and a walkie-talkie like this was a military checkpoint and she was guarding state secret. I walked up calmly and asked her if she knew anything about the new hardware on my gate. Her response? "I'm preventing unauthorized use of private HOA roadways. You can apply for a monthly access pass through the board." The board, by the way, consisted of her sister, and a third woman who looked like she'd been taxidermied during a Real Housewives marathon. I asked Karen if she was out of her mind. She smiled like a python about to swallow a goat and said, "The rules are the rules." Now, I don't usually escalate things. I like my peace. I run cattle, repair fences, grow my vegetables, and mind my business. But I also don't let nosy suburban tyrants with no legal authority put chains on my property and charge me to access my own land. I called the sheriff. He came out, saw the padlock, shrugged. "Technically, it's your easement, but since it touches HOA land, you might have to sort this in civil court." Karen was giddy. She waved from her lawn chair like this was a parade. That night, I sat down and studied my plat map. I double-checked the easement records. The law was on my side, but law takes time. Karen was banking on that. So I decided to play her game, but with better rules. The next morning, I brought out a saw, an angle grinder, and 3 spike strips that I'd custom-ordered back when we had trouble with night poachers. I installed 2 across the inside of the gate and 1 on the outside. Then I added a sign, plain as day. "Improper entry will result in tire damage, $100 per incident fee." My fence line now looked like Fort Knox. Then, cherry on top, I installed a pay box with a card reader that led to a dummy HOA portal, my own creation. It charged $100 per access pass, and logged the vehicle make and plate. Karen was livid. She came storming out in a purple bathrobe and Crocs, yelling something about trespassing and vandalism. I pointed to my security camera. "Smile for the court, Karen." She tried to call the sheriff again. This time, he laughed. Said if she wanted the spike strips removed, she'd have to prove ownership of the gate. Since she couldn't, he told her to stay off my property and stop interfering. She screeched something about legal review and drove off, right over the outer spike strip I hadn't yet pulled back. Her front passenger tire exploded like a rotten watermelon under a tractor. I watched from the porch as she fishtailed, skidded to the shoulder, and leapt out of the car like it was on fire. I made a fresh cup of coffee and waved. "Invoice is in your email." Over the next week, Karen escalated. First, she tried to file a noise complaint. About what, I'm still not sure. Then she set up road closed signs that blocked off the cul-de-sac and put up flyers calling me a hostile outsider. No one cared. My neighbors were mostly quiet folks, and most of them already hated Karen. A few even thanked me for putting her in her place. But Karen wasn't done. One afternoon, I came back from a feed run to find a private tow truck trying to haul away my work truck parked beside the gate. I asked the driver who called him. He gestured at Karen's house across the street. Lady said it was an HOA violation. I pointed at the dirt. This ain't HOA property. He hesitated. She said you were behind on your dues. I pulled out my wallet and handed him a copy of my deed that I now carried for just such stupidity. The man looked it over and just sighed. I don't get paid enough for this, he muttered and drove off. That's when I realized Karen wasn't trying to win. She was trying to wear me down. Turn every moment of peace into a landmine. But what she didn't know was that I don't get tired when someone's poking the bear. I get calculating. So I called up my cousin, a land surveyor, and asked him to do a full boundary resurvey of the area between her lot and mine. Then I submitted a request to the county planning board to declare a public utility path across her parcel, because technically, my well line ran right beneath her little patch of dry weed. Took a few weeks, but I had the time. Karen didn't know that the minute she padlocked my gate, she gave me an excuse to get county eyes on her mess. While she was still filing fake code violations and trying to photograph my trash bins, I was quietly building a case. And once the county showed up and started asking questions, Karen's smugness dried up faster than her neglected lawn. Turns out she never properly disclosed a bunch of modifications to her property, including a weird gazebo structure she'd built over the utility easement without a permit. When the county handed her a list of violations, she flipped. I watched from my porch as she tried to argue with the inspector, arms flailing, voice shrieking. The inspector just kept nodding and taking note. I think he was enjoying himself. That night, someone tried to cut my fence. They didn't get far. I'd reinforced it with barbed wire and motion light. The security footage showed a figure about Karen's size stumbling away holding their hand. I didn't report it. Just sent her an email with the subject line, "Please stop injuring yourself on my property." Attached was a still frame of the video with her highlighted in red. Karen stopped appearing in her lawn chair after that. But I knew she wasn't done. She was stewing, plotting, and I was ready, because if she wanted to keep pushing, she was going to learn the hard way that poking a quiet man with a ranch and a lot of free time never ends well. I didn't hear from Karen for 3 days after the fence-cutting incident, and for a moment, I let myself believe the spike strips and the county violations had finally broken her spirit. But on day 4, just after sunrise, I stepped outside with my coffee and saw the unmistakable glitter of something new at the gate. She'd escalated. Again. This time it wasn't a padlock. It was a full steel barrier bolted directly into the ground, with a freshly poured concrete base anchoring it like a monument to lunacy. And standing beside it, arms crossed and smug as ever, was Karen herself, wearing a bright yellow construction vest, a plastic hard hat, and aviator sunglasses like she was starring in some deranged HOA-themed episode of Cops. She pointed at the new barricade before I could speak. "Emergency HOA security measure," she declared. "Until we resolve the easement issue, this road is officially closed." I didn't say a word. I just took a long sip from my mug, turned around, and walked back inside. My ranch has 3 access points. That gate was the most direct one, but not the only one. I hopped in my truck, drove the long way around through the East Trail, and came out behind her little setup. She saw me driving toward her from the rear like a ghost through the mist, and her jaw dropped. I pulled up right behind the barrier, got out, and asked, "So, do you have a permit for this construction?" She blinked. "It's not construction. It's enforcement." I pointed at the wet concrete. "Then I hope you enjoy explaining this enforcement to the county code office, and the fire marshal, and the civil engineer who's going to want to know why you're blocking an emergency easement without any drainage compliance." Karen didn't respond, but her mouth made a lot of movements that resembled a goldfish trying to recite Shakespeare. She eventually retreated into her house, leaving the barricade where it stood. I knew it would only last as long as the county inspector's patience. In the meantime, I walked the length of my fence and mapped out a new revenge strategy, one that involved more than spike strip. If Karen wanted to play games, I'd build a system so ridiculous, so legally airtight, and so creatively spiteful that she'd be begging for a simple gate padlock again. That week, I filed paperwork to incorporate my land as a private agricultural co-op. Just me, of course, but it sounded official, and declared all access points to be controlled livestock transfer zones. Then I registered a small access fee with the county for any non-coop traffic. It cost $50 per trip, cash or card, no exceptions. I installed cameras, license plate readers, and 2 motion-activated speakers that blared a cow moo followed by a monotone voice. Welcome to Whispering Pines Agricultural Access Zone. Please pay the toll to proceed. The name was fake. The mooing wasn't. Karen couldn't make it 10 feet down the road without setting off the speaker and nearly jumping out of her orthopedic sandals. She tried to get me fined. She called the HOA lawyer, who was just her cousin with a real estate license, and claimed I was obstructing community access. I sent the lawyer a copy of the easement ruling, the county survey, the livestock co-op registration, and an invoice for $300 in unauthorized access fees. He never responded. Karen, of course, doubled down. She hired some poor teenager off Craigslist to stand near the barrier in a reflective vest and wave people away like he was directing aircraft. I felt a little bad for the kid. I brought him lemonade one afternoon and told him he was technically trespassing. He quit by sunset. Then Karen made her boldest move yet. She went full propaganda. Printed a newsletter called HOA Truth Watch and started stuffing it in mailboxes, claiming I was threatening neighborhood safety with booby traps, rogue livestock, and hostile agriculture. I read it while eating a bowl of chili and nearly choked when I saw the clip-art cow breathing fire like a dragon. I highlighted a few passages, wrote defamation equals lawsuit in red marker, and left it taped to her front door. With a bouquet of hay. For dramatic effect. Things hit a new level when she called animal control and reported that I was keeping wild, aggressive cattle near a public road. 2 officers showed up the next morning, looking sheepish but obligated. I walked them around, showed them the cows, who were lazily chewing cud and barely aware of the drama they'd inspired. One officer even pet one and said, "That's the friendliest aggressive livestock I've ever seen." I gave them both a tour of the property and offered to email over the full legal document. They declined. But they did promise to file a report about the false complaint. Karen saw the officers leave and assumed she'd won something. She even yelled, "You better start packing," from her porch like this was a western and she was the sheriff. I didn't respond. I just walked back to my porch and began drafting an open letter to the HOA board, again, consisting of Karen and her 2 cronies, demanding an immediate cease and desist of all interference. I CC'd the Real County Board and the Sheriff's Department. That letter turned out to be the best move I could have made. 2 days later, I got a knock on my door from a man in a county truck. He said they'd received my complaint, reviewed the documentation, and realized Karen's lot had been misclassified for years. Technically, she was the one encroaching on county-maintained utility space. Her mailbox, her hedges, even part of her driveway, all illegal. The man was polite but firm. She might want to get ahead of this before we start issuing fines. I didn't gloat. Not yet. But the moment he left, I brewed the strongest coffee I had and walked out to my gate with a little folding table, a chair, and a big wooden sign. Access fees. $100. Violators will be invoiced. Non-payment results in collection. Within an hour, Karen stormed down the road, holding her copy of HOA Truth Watch and demanding I cease and desist all toll operations. I said I'd consider it if she removed the steel barrier. She refused. So I smiled and told her, "Well then, the mooing continues." She stormed off, but not before threatening to sue me for emotional distress. I offered her a brochure for Whispering Pines Agricultural Co-op. She tore it in half. The next week, things started unraveling for her. Neighbors who'd mostly stayed quiet finally had enough. Apparently, she'd been fining people for everything from dandelions to leaving their porch lights on too late. One guy down the street found a $75 noise violation ticket on his windshield for hammering a fence post at noon. People started sharing stories, forming group chats. A retired firefighter named Rick printed Karen's bogus HOA rules and handed out red pens so folks could cross out everything that wasn't legal. It looked like a massacre of logic. By the end of that year, Project Pivot had over 1,000 active members worldwide. Schools were integrating his low-cost accessibility designs into curriculum. He was asked to speak at an international design conference in Tokyo the following summer. And as we sat once again on our back porch, I asked him if he ever thought about her, about what she did, how it all started. He shrugged. Sometimes. But not with anger. Mostly just wonder. Like, why someone would spend so much time trying to make things worse for other people. I nodded. And he smiled, leaning back in his chair. It doesn't matter. We made it better instead. The truth is, Karen slashed more than just tires that day. She tried to slash dignity, hope, potential. But what she didn't understand is that when you attack someone who's already spent their life overcoming obstacles, you don't break them, you forge them. Ben didn't just rise above it. He built something so much stronger than her hate. And in the end, all she could do was watch. I knew the final straw had landed when Karen drove past my fence one morning and didn't even glance at it. No shouting. No clipboard. No dramatic pointing or attempted citations. Just a tight-jawed stare through her windshield and a neck vein that looked ready to pop like a microwave hot dog. That kind of silence from Karen wasn't peace. It was a warning. Like the eerie calm before a tornado flattens the barn. And sure enough, less than 48 hours later, the storm hit. Not with drama this time, but paperwork. A thick, overly stapled envelope landed in my mailbox, wrapped in plastic and marked with a smug little stamp. HOA Legal Notice. Inside was a mess of badly formatted legal jargon claiming I was in violation of community guidelines regarding nuisance activity, unauthorized toll operations, and livestock hazards. Apparently, Karen had gotten one of her cousin's friends to draft something that looked vaguely threatening if you squinted at it in dim light. I recognized half the citations as being copied and pasted from a totally different HOA's bylaws, the one across the county line. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or get offended by how little effort she'd put into it. But I didn't throw it away. No, I kept it, annotated it, and forwarded the whole thing to my real lawyer, the kind who actually passed the bar and didn't live in his mom's guesthouse. Meanwhile, I got a call from Danielle, the quiet mom-turned-neighborhood hero. She sounded amused. Karen just tried to file an injunction against your mooing speaker, she said. Filed it under auditory harassment. The clerk almost laughed her out of the building. Apparently, Karen was also trying to block Danielle's HOA dissolution motion by claiming she'd been coerced by rogue agricultural extremists. That was a new one. I asked Danielle if she needed anything from me. Her response? Just keep being you. Karen, though, was far from done. When legal threats failed, she went low. Real low. One morning I found my pasture gate open. 2 cows were wandering near the road. No one had been hurt, thank God, but the lock had been cut clean, bolt cutters, most likely. I checked the security footage. Blurry, of course, but the figure had Karen's build, Karen's limp, and Karen's complete lack of stealth. I printed a still frame, blew it up, and hung it on my pasture fence under a laminated sign. Cattle tampering is a felony. Enjoy your court date. That went viral in the neighborhood group chat within 2 hours. Karen retaliated by calling code enforcement to report that I had improper fencing and unsecured livestock. When the inspector arrived, he brought coffee and donut. Got any more signs? He joked. My wife loved the last one. He looked around, saw everything was not only up to code but downright pristine, and filed a glowing report. Karen, meanwhile, started spiraling. One afternoon, I heard shouting. Karen was on the phone, pacing in her driveway, absolutely losing it. You said he wouldn't fight back. You said the co-op thing was fake. I couldn't hear the other side, but I did catch her throwing her phone onto her lawn and screaming, "I'm surrounded by morons!" before storming inside and slamming the door so hard her wind chimes committed suicide. That was the moment I realized something deeper was going on. This wasn't just about fences and easements. This was Karen trying to reclaim control of something she'd never really owned. A few days later, a man in a suit knocked on my door. He introduced himself as a county mediator, sent at Karen's request to settle our land dispute before it escalated. I invited him in, offered him coffee, and laid out every legal document I'd collected over the past 2 months: easement maps, utility permits, livestock zoning approvals, you name it. He flipped through them slowly, clearly impressed. Then he asked if he could see Karen's claims. I said I had a copy, handed him the HOA legal notice, and watched his face tighten like he'd bitten into a lemon. "This isn't even enforceable," he muttered. Then he sighed. "I'm going to have to report this. She's wasting county resources." I smiled. "Better bring more wind chimes." The fallout came fast. Karen got slapped with a warning for filing frivolous legal actions. Her so-called lawyer vanished from the picture entirely, probably afraid of getting caught in the splash zone. The newsletter stopped appearing in mailboxes. Her signs disappeared. Even the private HOA property placards she'd planted along the road like cursed garden gnomes were quietly taken down. But none of it compared to what happened next. At a special meeting convened by the county board, Danielle presented her full case to dissolve the HOA. Every fake rule, every bogus fine, every complaint. She brought testimonials, emails, even a video compilation of Karen screaming at joggers, trash collectors, and a teenager for parking too confidently. The board didn't need much convincing. They voted unanimously to revoke the HOA's charter. Effective immediately, it was dissolved. No more Karen-led authority. No more weaponized newsletters. Just a very angry woman in a bathrobe yelling at a system that had finally told her no. When I got the news, I walked out to my gate and flipped my wooden sign around. On the other side, painted in red block letters, HOA, rest in pieces. People honked when they passed. Someone left a thank you pie on my porch. I never figured out who, but it was cherry, and it was excellent. Karen, meanwhile, was rarely seen outside. When she did emerge, it was usually just to glare from behind her hedges like a raccoon that had lost its dumpster privileges. I figured that was the end of it. Victory secured. Battle over. But of course, Karen doesn't know when to quit. About a week after the HOA was disbanded, a for sale sign popped up in her yard. Not from a local agency, either. It was from some upscale urban firm with a name that sounded like it sold overpriced olive oil. I figured she was trying to cut and run, blame the decline in neighborhood standards, on me and move somewhere that still respected laminated bylaws. Except the sale didn't go through. Because the day after the sign went up, the county posted a notice on her door. Code violations. Multiple. The gazebo, the driveway encroachments, even the privacy hedge she'd planted over a drainage line, it all had to go or face daily fines. Karen pulled the sign down the same day and retreated back into her fortress of delusion. But the kicker? Her neighbor, Rick the retired firefighter, bought the empty lot she once used as leverage over my easement, paid cash, then invited me over to help him build a garden shed on it, with a grill and a beer fridge. That weekend, we held a block barbecue. Karen wasn't invited. That didn't stop her from watching, though. She stood in her window, arms crossed, mouth moving as if she were casting silent curses. I raised a toast in her direction anyway. To community, I said. And to never padlocking someone else's gate again. And just when I thought Karen had learned her lesson, she tried one last stunt. Late one night, I heard an engine, looked out my window and saw her creeping down the road in her CRV, flashlight poking out the window, scanning for something. I watched her pull over by my outer fence and start fumbling with something in the dark, probably trying to remove the last spike strip. What she didn't realize was that I'd replaced it with a sensor-activated camera rigged to a floodlight. The moment she stepped over the post, the whole fence line lit up like a football stadium. She dropped her flashlight, tripped, and fell flat in the dirt. The camera took 6 photos, auto-sent them to my email, and one of them captured her mid-fall with the most priceless expression I've ever seen. I printed that one too. It now hangs in my workshop above my tool bench, labeled Karen's Last Stand. It's been quiet since then. Karen's yard is overgrown. Her mail piles up. Her car hasn't moved in weeks. Some say she moved in with her sister. Others say she's still inside, muttering about easements and rogue cattle. I don't really care either way. The war is over. The peace has returned. And the gate? Still standing. Still spiked. Still mine. The truth is, I almost missed the chaos. Not the stress, not the nonsense, but the thrill of outmaneuvering someone so wildly entitled they practically dared you to ruin their day with logic. After Karen's final nosedive into my dirt driveway and the silent retreat that followed, the neighborhood slipped into something that had been missing for years: actual peace. People gardened without inspection. Kids rode bikes without citations. Rick built his shed, added a fire pit, and started holding Friday night cookouts that felt like they were cleansing the air of HOA residue. Even the mailman looked less stressed. But I knew better than to fully relax. Karen didn't vanish so much as simmer beneath the surface. When someone that controlling loses their grip, they don't stop scheming, they just change tactics. So I kept the sensors armed, cameras rolling, and legal documents laminated. I thought maybe she'd try another physical stunt. Cut a wire. Pull a fence post. Maybe even trespass again. But instead, she did something almost clever. Almost. It started with a letter from the county water board. According to the form, there was a discrepancy in the property line regarding my well. It was flagged for review and investigation. That raised my eyebrow. My well had been inspected, tested, and approved last year. I'd filed every permit, paid every fee. It was locked tighter than my gate. But the wording on the notice smelled familiar. Bureaucratic, yes, but with a petty flair that could only come from someone like Karen. I made one phone call to the county clerk and confirmed what I suspected. The complaint had come from a concerned community representative who provided photo evidence that my water supply extended beyond my legal plot line. Of course, there was no actual evidence, but there was a blurry image of a garden hose that had apparently wandered a few feet too far into the dirt. I laughed when I saw it. A garden hose. Karen's new battle plan was to accuse me of water theft. I had to admire the desperation. It was like watching someone who lost a chess match flip the board and yell, "Actually, this was poker." But if she wanted to play the code game, I had more than a few counters ready. I invited the inspector out personally, gave him the full tour, printed him maps, offered cold lemonade, and pointed to the actual well cap, which was well within bounds. He nodded, thanked me for being cooperative, and promised the complaint would be closed. Then he asked, off the record, "She give you trouble too?" I chuckled. Define trouble. His grin said enough. Karen must have seen the inspector leave without issuing a violation, because 2 days later, she tried again. This time with the fire department. Apparently, my barbecue grill was an unpermitted outdoor combustion hazard. Never mind the fact that it sat on a concrete patio and met every safety code in the state. A nice fire marshal named Janice came by, checked everything, and asked if I had any enemies with too much free time and a vendetta against backyard fun. I handed her a cherry cobbler my neighbor had baked. She promised to file a glowing report and warned me, people like her don't know how to lose quietly. And that's when it hit me, Karen wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to make me tired, exhaust me, bury me in complaints, hoping eventually I'd give up and move or tear down my spikes or shut off the cow speaker just to stop the noise. It was a siege by paperwork. But what she didn't realize was I actually liked this game. Because I was better at it. So I flipped the script. I filed my own set of complaints. Only mine were real. Remember that shed Karen built 3 years ago without a permit? Turns out it wasn't just an eyesore. It sat directly on top of a utility easement, one marked for future fiber optic expansion. The county had it in their long-term plans, but no one had pushed it until I did. 1 form, 2 signatures, a polite email, and suddenly Karen's precious HOA community center, aka her potting shed of gossip, was in violation. When the county posted the notice, I thought she might explode. She stormed across the street, red-faced and breathless, waving the paper like it was a death warrant. "You think you're clever?" she shrieked. "This is retaliation." I sipped my coffee and responded calmly, "No, Karen. This is code enforcement. You know, that thing you love so much." She tried to fight it, of course. Hired a real lawyer this time. I know, because he actually wore a suit and didn't look like he lived off gas station nachos. He tried to negotiate. Asked if we could both step back and avoid mutual destruction. I smiled. "I'm not destructive. I'm just thorough." He didn't press the issue. By the time the shed was partially dismantled and the HOA was officially dissolved on county records, Karen's house looked more like a retreating army bunker than a suburban homestead. The once perfectly trimmed hedges were dying. Her windows stayed shuttered. Her lawn looked like it gave up trying to impress anyone. But just when I thought she'd finally surrendered for good, she threw out one last grenade. A county-wide development proposal was quietly moving through the planning office. It involved expanding a new road system near the southern edge of our neighborhood. Karen, in a final, desperate move, filed an amendment suggesting the road be rerouted through my eastern pasture, the same one my cattle grazed in every spring. Her logic? The existing path interferes with neighborhood character. Of course, she didn't own any of the land affected. But she signed it, on behalf of the community. The same community that had voted to dissolve her. It almost worked. A planner flagged it for review. I found out because Rick's cousin works for the road department and gave me a heads up. I pulled every document, map, and legal survey I had, drafted a furious rebuttal, and showed up at the next public meeting with printouts, photos, and a USB stick full of drone footage. Karen also showed up. She tried to present her case, complete with a color-coded diagram and a speech full of big words she clearly didn't understand. The board let her talk. Then they let me talk. Then they laughed. One member even asked, "Didn't we revoke this woman's authority?" Karen turned redder than a fire hydrant and stormed out mid-meeting, muttering something about lawsuits and libel. That night, I walked my property line one last time, checked the spikes, pet the cows, drank a cold beer at the edge of the pasture, and watched the stars come out. It had been months of madness, but the boundary was secure. The laws were on my side. And Karen? Karen had nothing left but bitterness and bad ideas. Still, I didn't remove the cameras, or the cow speaker, or the motion lights. Not out of paranoia, out of principle. People like Karen don't disappear. They stew. They regroup. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually they pop up again like a bad septic system. And when she did, I'd be ready. Because this ranch didn't run on fear. It ran on patience, coffee, and the kind of long-game grit you can't teach in an HOA meeting. About 2 months passed without a peep from Karen. No complaints, no drive-bys, no flashlight-in-the-night nonsense. It was so quiet I almost convinced myself she'd finally accepted defeat. The grass on her lawn kept growing until it looked like she was cultivating a prairie ecosystem. A "for sale by owner" sign popped up again, this time duct-taped to a folding chair and slowly tilting sideways like her sanity. But something about the silence didn't sit right. Karen had never been the type to go gentle into irrelevance. She was a control freak marinated in narcissism. And people like that don't just quit. They reload. Sure enough, The final chapter kicked off on a Wednesday morning with a thud loud enough to rattle my front windows. I opened the door and found a bright orange notice stapled to my mailbox post. Notice of intent to rezone. It read, followed by a bunch of jargon that basically said my entire property was being reviewed for possible reclassification to mixed-use suburban development. I blinked twice. Then read it again. Karen had found a new angle. Now, it's important to understand that my land wasn't just some backyard plot. This was a working ranch, 20 acres of open space zoned specifically for agriculture and protected under rural preservation laws. Rezoning it for suburban development wasn't just stupid, it was impossible. Or at least it should have been. But Karen had slipped a petition through the local planning commission filled with forged signatures from concerned residents claiming my property was underutilized and better suited for eco-conscious townhomes. I marched straight to the planning office and slammed the notice on the counter. The clerk, an overworked guy named Greg who looked like he survived solely on caffeine and existential dread, read it and sighed like this was not the first Karen attack he'd had to undo. "Yeah," he said, rubbing his temples. "This one's unique. Looks like she attached a map with proposed cul-de-sacs and solar panel installations. Even included a sketch of a yoga pavilion." He slid the paper toward me. Sure enough, there it was, a pastel-colored fever dream with my barn replaced by a community meditation dome. "This is illegal," I said, calm but direct. She forged signatures, trespassed to gather photos, and filed false paperwork. Greg nodded. "Yep. And when the commission finds out, she's gonna be in serious trouble. But the thing is, we have to hold a public review before we can dismiss it entirely. It's the law." I narrowed my eyes. "So what you're saying is, I have to show up, publicly, and crush her fantasy one more time." Greg offered a tired smile. "Basically." The hearing was set for the following Tuesday night. By then, the neighborhood buzz was back. People were talking. Apparently, Karen had gone door to door handing out brochures for her Green Vision expansion plan, promising increased property values, private yoga instructors, and a Karen-curated aesthetics committee. The cover of the brochure? A photoshopped image of her standing in front of what used to be my barn, now replaced with a wellness center that looked like a rejected IKEA concept. I didn't just prepare, I went nuclear. I had 3 poster boards with legal citations, satellite images showing the active agricultural use of my land, a printed copy of the state's rural protection law, and a sworn affidavit from the county livestock board verifying that I, in fact, ran a working ranch. I also brought a USB stick with time-lapse footage of my cows, my planting cycles, and Rick building his shed while Karen screamed in the background on loop. Petty? Maybe. But effective. The night of the hearing, the place was packed. Karen showed up wearing a floor-length teal dress and a rhinestone pin that read Hope. She passed out mini water bottles labeled, "The future is green." Then she stepped up to the podium and launched into a speech so packed with buzzwords it sounded like a TED Talk written by a Roomba. "This community is stagnating," she declared. "We need innovation, wellness, and upward energy flows. And what better place than underutilized land that could host healing spaces for all?" I waited until she finished, complete with a round of awkward forced claps from the 2 remaining Karen sympathizers in the room, then stood and walked to the podium with my stack of evidence. No theatrics, just facts. I spoke plainly, clearly, and with just enough sarcasm to keep it entertaining. My name is Colton Reed. I own the land in question. It's not underutilized. It's a legally protected agricultural parcel. I raise livestock. I harvest hay. And this, I held up her fake map, is not a development plan. It's a delusion. A dangerous, dishonest, forged delusion. There were a few gasps. I handed over my USB to the board chair and clicked through my presentation. Video of cows grazing. Time-stamped drone footage. A screenshot of Karen's forged petition with 3 names I recognized as deceased. And finally, A freeze frame of Karen trespassing to take her, before, photos for the plan. The board stared in stunned silence. Then the chair spoke. Mrs. Millstone, did you fabricate these documents? Karen stammered. They're aspirational. It's called vision casting. The board chair didn't even blink. This is perjury, ma'am. Karen exploded. You're all against me. You've always been against me. This neighborhood used to have standards. Now it's just cows and chaos. Someone in the back whispered, Cows and Chaos should be a band name. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The board adjourned with a unanimous vote to dismiss the proposal. They also filed a formal complaint to investigate Karen's actions. I left the building to a line of people shaking my hand, some offering beers, others just smiling with that look of sweet, long-awaited justice. Karen, meanwhile, stormed off in the opposite direction, her tote bag slapping against her hip like a broken metronome of rage. The next morning, another sign popped up in her yard. A real one this time. Foreclosure sale pending. I didn't know whether it was unpaid code violation fines, legal fees, or just karma with a clipboard, but Karen had finally run out of lives. She left a week later. No goodbye. No dramatic final meltdown. Just a rental truck that came in the night and took her away like a whisper of entitlement fading into the distance. Someone said she moved to a condo in a city that still had an HOA. I said a prayer for them. As for me, the ranch is thriving. I added another gate just for fun. Rick finished his outdoor kitchen and now hosts a monthly Karen-free cookout. Danielle teaches weekend classes on how to file municipal complaints the right way. The cows are calm. The fences are strong. The spike strips are shiny. I still keep the sign up, unauthorized entry, $100 fee. Mooing will commence. Not because I expect trouble anymore, but because it reminds me what peace costs. And that sometimes, to defend your land, you don't need fists. You need patience, law books, and just the right amount of sarcastic spite. Karen tried to own the road, the gate, the land, the law, even reality itself. But what she forgot was simple. You don't padlock a man's gate and expect him to pay rent. You don't trespass and think it'll go unnoticed. And you definitely don't mess with a rancher who has nothing but time, a legal easement, and an unshakable love of tactical revenge. Game over, Karen. The gate's still closed. But this time, only on you.